Welcome. This is going to be a great episode where we cover a recent mock draft that we did with some listeners in the Discord and in our social media. We're ready to break down this draft and show you how you could win your draft around the turns. Welcome in for another episode of the Dynasty Gambit. My name is Ben McCowan, and I'm joined here by Austin Jacobson. And tonight, we're going to be going over a very fun mock that we did last week, Austin. We went over it a little bit and just kind of had some thoughts on how our listeners and other people can go into a startup and try to build a good contending team or a strong team from the beginning, and how to do that around the turns, right? We took the 1-1 and the 1-12 and decided to go from there and kind of show everybody kind of what our strategy was in regards to how we want to do a startup.
I think it's interesting. I know that a lot of people going into a startup are either like, I have to be all in on competing and taking veterans and treating it like it's redraft, or I have to be full on productive struggle, only draft guys under 24 years old. But I think you can kind of thread the needle and draft a team that has a lot of good young assets, but still gives you a chance to compete. And that's, I think, both of us are kind of trying to do in this draft. You're picking at the beginning at the 101, and I was picking at the 112. So we're just going to kind of like address strategies and how you approach it from each turn and show how we kind of built a competitive roster. So that'll be interesting to get into.
Let's go ahead and just pull it up, man. Let's see here. So we have the draft board, and just like you mentioned, you're right there I'm right at the 101, you're at the 112, and let's go ahead and just start from the beginning, kind of what the strategy is when you have the 1-1 on the board. Now, I should go over settings. This is a super flex 0.75 tight end premium as we normally do. No other settings really to be concerned with other than that. And
I believe it's a start. It's a start 9, right? It's a two running back, 2 wide receiver, 2 flex, I believe is what it was. So it's a little bit shallower than some leagues.
Yes. Yeah. So start 9. Definitely want to focus on the studs at that point and really hammer those first 9 rounds if you can. And obviously this is not accounting for trades, right? We're just picking at each point of the draft. But when you're thinking of the 1-1, I was faced with a choice, and for me, it kind of came down to 3 choices, and I narrowed that down to 2. And I still wonder, Austin, at this point, I think it's that close of a battle between the 2 picks in my head between Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson that I still battle myself. Like, did I make the right choice in picking Josh Allen? And I still believe that I think he offers, just as Lamar Jackson does, game-breaking ability. And I believe in the Buffalo offense this season coming up. What they have on as weapons for Josh Allen, they have James Cook, Ray Davis, Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir. They just brought in Josh Palmer. Elijah Moore is going to be somewhat of a factor. They still have Dalton Kincaid. So they've got the weapons there. I'm not feeling amazing compared to, but also Lamar has his own bugaboos about his weapons. It's the rushing upside that really pushes these guys up here, and they're going to figure it out, and they're going to, compete for QB1, QB2, potentially top 5 QB as a floor for me. And so that's kind of where my thought process was at. How do you feel about, picking any of those guys with the 1-1?
Yeah, I think the process is the same regardless of which one of them you take. I think you're just taking in your favorite of those quarterbacks with the rushing upside. Daniel's obviously the youngest, but the least proven. I think it's Josh Allen that's coming off, I think it's 4 straight seasons as a top 2 fantasy quarterback. So he's the safest bet. So I like Josh Allen. He's my number 1 overall, but really the strategy you go for in this mock could be done with Daniels or Jackson as well. So it's kind of a pick your poison. And I think you don't need to be too torn up about which one to pick. I think maybe it's one of those situations where if you have the 101 and you want to try to slide back to 2 or 3 since it's one big tier and get a little piece, I think that's something you can do. But if not, a lot of times everybody kind of feels the same way, and so they're not trying to move up. So you can, I don't think you have to worry about it too much. Just take your guy and figure it out from there. But yeah, Allen, I think, is the pick I usually make from the 101. So I think that's a good choice.
Absolutely. And so we followed that up with the expected picks to follow, which was Jaden Daniels picked by Jose at 102. Logan picked Lamar Jackson at 103. Dalton, Jamar Chase at 104, which I like that pick. I think that's pretty chalky there. We got Spencer at 105 picking Justin Jefferson. We have Foot at 106 picking Burrow. Hurts at 1-7. Bowers 1-8. Neighbors at 1-9. Lamb at 110. Bijan at 111. And you finish us off in the first round with Puka Nacua. Austin, let's and you know what? While we're at it, why don't we just burn that corner, and we'll also include
Yeah. So a lot of times I'm looking, obviously the first thing you want to look for in a super flex draft is quarterback. But I view the top 5, sort of a Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, and Joe Burrow is kind of the clear top tier. And then it's kind of a group. I like Patrick Mahomes, but I didn't really feel like I wanted him right here at this turn. I think if this wasn't third round reversal, which we did do third round reversal, so I was going to get the 301 as well, I would have been more hesitant to wait on QB. But I had a feeling that one of Mahomes, Caleb Williams, Drake May, or Bo Nix would make it back. And spoiler alert, they did. But so typically here I maybe go 2 wide receivers. I thought about doing Puka and Amon-Ra or Puka and Nico. But because it's only start 2 wide receiver, it's only a start 9. I think having a great hammer running back in that RB1 spot is more important than it would be if it was a deeper league or if it was a start 3 wide receiver. And so I went ahead and went with the best wide receiver on my board and the best running back on my board. And that was Puka. And Gibbs, I like Gibbs a lot. I think in a full PPR, he really stands out as a running back. There's some concern with Puka with the Stafford injury and what does life for Puka look like post Stafford, even if Stafford's healthy this year. But he's just been rock solid through his first 2 years. Not much to complain about. I think he's going to be a solid wide receiver 1 for the next decade. Absolutely. So I like locking in 2 young guys that kind of anchor my wide receiver and running back position and give me a lot of flexibility going forward. And then obviously I'm looking that, I like who's probably going to be there at the 301 at quarterback. And it ended up working out, but we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, we'll definitely delve into that once we get to the third round and fourth round. But I also am in the same sentiment as far as when I'm at the turn at the end. I actually a lot of times don't end up picking a quarterback in a third round reversal because I end up getting a lot of those top tier non-quarterback positions right at the end there. So I think those were great picks, Austin. Now, looking back at the first round, again, this is a very chalky round in general. Everybody made the picks that were expected, but was there any value to you that ended up falling in this first round?
I think for me, I look at maybe I'm a little higher than some people, but I would definitely take Jalen Hurts ahead of Joe Burrow right now, just because of the rushing upside. I think Joe Burrow is a better real life quarterback, but for fantasy, that just the tush push, just the rushing upside. I think Jalen Hurts is probably closer to those top 3 than he is to anyone else. So I think getting him at 107, I think I could justify taking him as high as 104 or 105. So getting him at 107 is a bit of a value. But again, a pretty chalky first round. Bowers is a little bit high, but it is a 0.75 time premium, so I can't really fault it at the 108.
And I will say, I think we did end up deciding it was going to be 4-point pass touchdown. So if you're deciding between 4-point and 6-point, that's where I think Burrow and Hurts can kind of flip flop, because in 6-point, Burrow gets a little bit of an edge in that format. I really like Deku's pick of Bijan Robinson at 111. I think with it being start 9, only 2 wide receiver, I think you can definitely take a hammer running back a little bit earlier. And I've seen Bijan go all the way up to, as crazy as it sounds, sometimes up to the 1.5, 1.6. And I mean, I think that's definitely pretty bullish, but to get him at the 111 and a start 9, 2 wide receiver, that's a really good pick there. And then I think it's the same thing with your Gibbs pick. I think Bijan and Gibbs are really good picks in that range. But moving on to the second round, Austin, we definitely start your round with your pick of Gibbs, following it up by Amon-Ra at 2-2, Drake London at 2-3, Brian Thomas at 2-4, Caleb Williams at 2-5, Ashton Genty, Saquon Barkley, Nico, Patrick Mahomes, Trey McBride, Lad McConkey, and then I finish it out with Drake May at the 2-12 here. And we kind of brought up how, with it being start 9, with it being super flex, to me, I wanted to lock up my QB room at this point. And to me, I think Drake May was a value falling to 212. I think really you could see him go anywhere between 2.5 to all the way to the early third round. But I think at 212, it's a great value to get Drake May. And I really, really see the path for him to be, a QB1, hopefully in that higher end of QB1 if we see some magic happen this season with New England. But I think the future is bright for him there. And again, we're looking at dynasty. So this is looking at his future. He's a young, bright spot in New England. And then we start off the third round with your pick of Bo Nix at 3-1.
Yeah. I'm pointing out real quick. I think that Dalton getting Patrick Mahomes at 209 is great value. I seriously thought about him at the turn. So
yeah,
I think he should probably go no lower than 204, 205. So I think that was really good value. But yeah, once as the second round was going on, I was kind of like, okay, I want, once Caleb Williams was taken, part of me was like, maybe Mahomes makes it to 301, but I knew that was unlikely. And then once he went, I was like, okay, I'm hoping for either May or Nix. I have May a little bit higher, but I like them both. So either one of those guys, I feel very good about having a, top 2 running back and probably a top 5 wide receiver. And so then starting off with those 2 guys and then locking up QB1. And then I had a whole tier of guys that I kind of have in the same tier. I'm like, I hope that I can lock up a second one, someone in the Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Brock Purdy, Jordan Love tier. So those are kind of the guys I pinpointed as maybe they'll make it back to me. And one of them did, which we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, so starting it off with wide receiver 1, running back 1, quarterback 1. Again, I don't mind going the 2 quarterbacks to start. But in this shallower format, I do like to kind of have some flexibility where I can go. I think you made the value pick at your spot. Just sometimes you draft those 2 quarterbacks early and then you get to your third round pick and you're like, man, the best player on the board is a quarterback, but I can't really take it right now. So I do think there's a time and a place for that. And I think it's a good, what you did is probably the picks I would have made at both spots. But there is upside to sort of when you draft different positions with your first 3 picks, everything's still on the board for you.
We'll talk about kind of strength and weaknesses of lineups as we get towards the end or maybe halfway through. But, definitely I had to start to make up some value in other positions since I did go quarterback heavy at the beginning. Yeah. And I'll kind of talk through that once we get to those points. But I do want to go back because you did point out the Patrick Mahomes value. I wanted to actually point out a great value at tight end, it being 0.75 tight end premium in Trey McBride. I think going at the 210 when you're talking about somebody who puts up very similar numbers to Brock Bowers. Yeah. I love Trey McBride and where that value is because I do see him going in the mid second, even up as high as in either 0.75 or full tight end premium up to early second round. So I think Logan got a very good value on Trey McBride there. And then as far as the third round goes, we started you off at Bo Nix. Then Deku ended up following that with Marvin Harrison. We followed up with Achane, Herbert, A.J. Brown, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Omarion Hampton, C.J. Stroud, Garrett Wilson, Tet McMillan, Travis Hunter, and then I finished off the round with Breece Hall. And then I'll also say that I ended up taking the turn with Rome Odunze at 4-1, which I think there was some choices in that. I wanted to lock up a wide receiver, and I didn't feel comfortable taking Rice at the 4-1, considering, I was trying to build a little bit of a contender with a little bit of flexibility, and with the suspension looming, I wanted a wide receiver that I could at least feel a lot more confident in to start the season. Rome Odunze, a little bit of a reach there looking back at it, but I do think I see the upside for him. And there has been a lot of great camp talk, which you have to take that for what it is. It's camp talk. Yeah. We'll see what it ends up turning out to be. But Breece Hall at the 312, we're talking about taking some hammers at each of the positions, right? And I still think Breece Hall, being 24 years old, new offensive coordinator with Tanner Engstrom coming in. You have Aaron Glenn as the head coach. They're going to want to run the ball. I know this is a Detroit fan. Like, that is the one thing that they love to do. And putting the ball in Breece Hall's hands. Like, there was a lot of the talk about Breece Hall having being put in a committee and rumors about them trading Breece Hall away during the offseason. And there was a lot of confirming talk from Aaron Glenn with Breece Hall of like, no, you are our running back. Like, you are the guy. So there's Braylon Allen's going to get his. I think he's going to be a good cuff, but Breece Hall is the guy in that backfield to have. I'm excited to see what happens in New York, but I wanted to at least start to kind of fill out the other pieces of my roster. And I think I feel pretty comfortable with Breece Hall as my RB1, and then took Rome Odunze at the 4-1. So, what are your thoughts?
I think it's one of those situations where it's like, for me, and if I'm looking at my own personal rankings, I would take Jonathan Taylor or Bucky Irving above Breece Hall. Maybe not Bucky Irving, but Jonathan Taylor I would, and I would probably take Rice or Higgins above Odunze. But really, it's the process is the right one, right? Like, just because I have a slight player preference for those guys doesn't really change the process. Again, it's like you're getting your hammer RB and a guy you believe in as a wide receiver 1. At this point, when you're in the 4th round, there's no slam dunk wide receiver 1, right? So you're looking at either a guy like Rice, right, who we've seen him produce like, a top 5 wide receiver, but there's a lot of questions. There's the injury, there's the suspension looming. And then you have a guy like T. Higgins that's had injury issues and is a clear 2 on his team.
Yeah.
And then you get into a bunch of veterans. And so it's, to me, Odunze has as high the upside as any of these guys. He's a guy you believe in, and he's a guy that you can, if he hits, will be a great value at 401. So taking that you start off with the 2 quarterbacks. So taking your shot on a guy that has a lot of upside at running back and a lot of upside at wide receiver is a great process there. So yeah, I like it.
So let's go ahead and actually, talk about some of the picks that we liked from the 3rd round. Looking back, it's interesting. I've seen Omarion Hampton climb up an ADP. And with the news now that we have on Rashawn Slater, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Omarion Hampton and that ADP, but something to keep a watch out for. I really like the pick of Tet McMillan at 310 to give Logan more love. Come on, man. But yeah, I mean, I think Tet has a high upside just as much as Rome Odunze does. And I kind of put them in that same tier, but I think it's, when you're comparing that tier of wide receiver, I want the reroll on Tet McMillan compared to, a wide receiver like Garrett Wilson or, Travis Hunter at 311 is a little rich for me. But I do like the Tet McMillan pick there. What do you like here, Austin?
What's interesting, so I talked about Mahomes last round with Dalton, and I'll talk about Garrett Wilson here. I think it's funny, in our a listener league that we did earlier this offseason, I had the 4th pick. I started off with Chase, Mahomes, and Garrett Wilson in this exact spot. And so Dalton copied me a little bit there. No, but I do think those are very good picks. I think it's good value with Mahomes and Garrett Wilson. I personally have Garrett Wilson right there with, JSN and AJ Brown. I have him ahead of Marvin Harrison. So I think that's, he's kind of the last of the tier for me, because really Garrett Wilson's the last one it's kind of a proven commodity. You're dealing with rookies and high upside guys after that. So I like his value at 309. I mean, I like Tet. And I honestly like Travis Hunter too. But there's some risk taking them in the 3rd round, when there's, some question marks around their profiles and for Travis Hunter, how much he's going to end up playing on offense, although it seems like we're trending more and more in the direction of him being primarily an offensive player, at least to start. So that's a good sign. But there's a wide range of things in this round. Buck Wild taking CJ Stroud earlier than I would like. But it's one of those flag placement things, and you're doing a stack with Nico Collins, right? So there's an upside there. But yeah,
I actually want to point out Chris, because I think I'd like to point out a second spotlight here. Like I'm sorry, Logan, but I might have to replace you here. Justin Herbert falling to the 3-4. That's a great value right there. I mean, he's basically in the same tier as Bo Nix, Drake May.
Yes, yeah.
And you're getting him, 5 picks later than Drake May, or 4 picks later than, or 3 or 4 picks later than Bo Nix. Like that's good value right there, especially close to the
and to start Neighbors and Brian Thomas, and take that gamble on quarterback, and to me get the last of a tier at quarterback there, and hang on and grab a guy like Herbert. I think you're off to a great start, so I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Absolutely. I like Chris's start there. So starting the 4th round, we talked about Odunze. Jose ended up picking Bucky Irving at the 4-2. Jonathan Taylor went to Logan at 4-3. Rashee Rice at the 4-4. Derrick Henry at 4-5. T. Higgins at 4-6. Kyron Williams at 4-7. Henderson at 4-8. Xavier Worthy at 4-9, Egbuka at 4-10, Tyler Warren at 4-11, and you end up picking Kyler Murray at the 4-12 and Devonta Smith at the 5-1. Let's talk through that, Austin.
Yeah, so for me, after I took Bo Nix, I was kind of thinking that more than likely I would be looking at Baker Mayfield, Brock Purdy, Jordan Love. And then I was like, well, maybe there's an outside chance Kyler Murray falls. And I honestly didn't expect him to be there. And even with a couple picks before I picked, I was looking at, both Greinberg and Dustin did not have quarterbacks. So I was expecting Kyler to go one of those 2 picks, and I was, gearing up to probably take Baker Mayfield, but he didn't go. And so I feel like that's an incredible value at the 4-12. I think people are really forgetting how good Kyler Murray can be. Even in a down season last year, I believe he was QB 11, which
actually, QB 10.
QB 10, yeah. So
really good.
I mean, people were really down on him last year, but when he's played, his last season where he played a fully healthy season before last year, he was a QB 3, and we've seen a lot from him. I mean, basically, I drafted him at what is this? I think it's QB 9 or 10. Let's see, 1, 2. I believe that is. Oh, it's more than that. Let's see, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, QB 12. So I feel like I'm pretty much drafting him at what his floor has been when healthy. So I like that pick a lot. I was very happy with it to have punted quarterback at the first 2 rounds and still end up with Bo Nix and Kyler Murray, who I both have I have both of those guys in my top 10. Or I might have Kyler 11th, but still like 2 guys that are QB 1s in my eyes to be able to start at that turn without getting a quarterback and still coming back and getting those 2 guys. I love that. And then I honestly, at 501, I thought about this pick. I took Kyler Murray immediately on the clock, and then I had to think about 501 a little bit. I didn't love any of the receivers on the board. Dante Smith is not a sexy pick. He's just a solid wide receiver too. But I didn't really like. I think it was mostly older guys, really. I could have taken running back, but there's a bunch of guys kind of in the same tier. If Travion Henderson had fallen, I probably would have taken him. Thought about Chase Brown. Chase Brown was the guy that I thought about at that pick. But I think there's a big tier of running backs, and I was hoping that one of them could get back to me. So I went ahead and took Devonta Smith here. And I think he's a perfectly fine wide receiver too. He's not going to make or break my team. But he's just going to be a solid placeholder in my lineup and put up some points for me. I think he's one of those guys that you can count on to not be a guy that's going to anchor you down and hurt your team, even if he isn't the most exciting pick. So I like him as a wide receiver too on the squad.
Yeah. I want to just point out, Austin, that, when you're talking about, you mentioned how there wasn't a lot of wide receivers left. I think when I'm looking at the board now, And I was in the moment, I was just drafting and I was looking at myself and who's the best player still available. But I wasn't really paying attention to the rest of the board in the sense of how many wide receivers went in those first 4 rounds. There was a lot. I mean, even Egbuka going as early as the 410, like that is, and Worthy at the 4-9. Like, I think that's where I was a little bit like shell shocked. I was like, whoa, okay. I think
both of those guys, that's the earliest I've seen them go. So,
same. Yeah. I mean, I've seen Worthy as early as the 5th round, or same thing with Ibuka, like late 5th, like early 6th. But I think those guys also saw that there was just a run of wide receivers that went. So I don't hate the picks, but like it definitely felt early. And then as far as going back to Kyler Murray, like I was actually talking about Kyler Murray last night and how, you know, he basically had his first full healthy season off of the ACL, and he performed up to QB 10, and I think we're hopefully going to see an even higher rushing upside with another full off season after the injury. I also am buying the dip on Kyler Murray right now, so I really love that value for you. Going back to the 4th round, what are some things that we like to see? I mean, personally, for me, I really liked being able to see Henderson go late 4th. I mean, you had Hampton go at 3-7, and then you had this whole round difference where, to me, Henderson has the upside to be able to match something that Hampton can do this season. And, you know, Mike ended up getting him in the late 4th. So I like it there. I like some other picks in this round, but what do you like here?
Yeah, Henderson's one that stood out to me. I like T. Higgins, but getting him there in the middle of the 4th. I think, you know, he's a guy that I'd be willing to take as early as the late 3rd, depending on the situation. So I like his value there. I think this has been it was a very wide receiver heavy, which is kind of interesting considering that it was only a start 2 wide receiver. I kind of was thinking I would go running back, a second running back, but just looking at the board, I was like, I am not comfortable with who I think will be on the board at 6-12. So I wanted to go ahead and lock in a wide receiver too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it ended up paying off for you just fine. So going through the 5th round, you started us off with Devonta Smith, George Kittle going at 5-2, Sam Laporta 5-3, Brock Purdy 5-4, Terry McLaurin at the 5-05, Jordan Love at the 5-6, Josh Jacobs at 5-7, Kenneth Walker 5-8, Baker Mayfield, Christian McCaffrey, Chase Brown, and I finished the round off with Jameson Williams and took Zay Flowers at the turn, which the process behind those picks was kind of what I was talking about earlier, where at this point I wanted to fill a need and was also looking at best players available. But you know, we talked about how it's start 2 wide receiver, which that's fine. But wide receivers, as we've talked about before, hold a lot more value longer term. And I think I was willing to wait on an RB2 or potentially another positional piece of things later on down the draft. And I think Jameson Williams provided the highest upside for the wide receivers that were left compared to, of course, who I took after him, and Zay Flowers, Metcalf, DJ Moore. And we talked about how all those wide receivers flew off. So, you know, for me, I'm kind of starting off a little bit with, in my opinion, a weakness at wide receiver, but it's not something that can't be fixed, whether it's you're going through the season and making trades. Jameson Williams also, again, offers high upside, and, you know, we're possibly going to see some great things coming out of Detroit. We hear some great things coming from John Morton, the OC, how he thinks the most explosive player on the offense is Jameson Williams, and he is that guy. And then I take Zay Flowers at the 6-1, and I want a piece of that Lamar Jackson passing offense pie, because Todd Monken has just showed us last season what Lamar can do when you open up the passing game for him. And I still think Zay Flowers is a talented enough wide receiver that in the 6th round, I'm willing to take the shot there as my wide receiver 3. What are your thoughts on Zay Flowers, Austin?
I mean, Zay Flowers, he's not super exciting, but I mean, he's been pretty solid in consistent, two back-to-back high end or low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 type seasons. I have him a little lower, but I don't mind getting a third wide receiver there. I think let me kind of put this out as a hypothetical. So obviously hindsight's 2020, but if you could go back, would you rather have the combination of Rashee Rice and James Cook? So let's say you took Rice instead of Hall and then Cook instead of Flowers, or Breece Hall and Zay Flowers. Which combo do you like better, Rashee Rice and James Cook, or Breece Hall and Zay Flowers?
Longer term, I'd probably take Rashee Rice and James Cook. I think the contract situation is going to get itself figured out, whether it's with Buffalo or not with Buffalo. And right. You're absolutely right. Like when we look back at drafts, you have your process. Yeah. Everybody has a different process about things, and we reevaluate afterwards. These mocks are for fun, and they're to help us build our process. But you do have to think of it like that. When you look back, it's very similar to when we're thinking about trades. Which side would you rather have?
Yeah.
Like you said, James Cook or Rashee Rice, or Breece Hall and Zay Flowers, or even sticking on the same team, James Cook and T. Higgins, or Breece Hall and Zay Flowers. And I think at that point, you're probably saying T. Higgins and James Cook. But I think you'll let the season play out, see how it goes. But I think the process probably takes the higher upside wide receiver with that safer running back still later in the 6th round.
And it's hard to know how things are going to go as far as what the trends is. Like a bunch of wide receivers went off the board quickly, and so it's kind of hard to know how it's going to go. But I think sometimes kind of figuring out your tiers and figuring out who are you comfortable with at each position, which is kind of what made me take Devonta Smith in that spot versus taking like a Chase Brown. Because I think there's a pretty big tier of wide receiver there, so I could come back around. I still grab, which we'll get to in a second, but I grabbed Chuba Hubbard, who I put kind of in that same tier, whereas I would have been left with having to take a Mike Evans or Jordan Addison, which you're either taking an old guy or you're taking a guy that has a lot of questions and suspension. And so it's just kind of like evaluating where can I get an edge at each position. I think it worked out fine for you, especially because you get a very solid RB2 later. But just looking at it, I think it's a good practice with these mock drafts, and I do this all the time of like looking back and saying like, okay, if I had done this instead, or even if you're battling between two players, kind of keep in the back of your mind, okay, remember that I was thinking about doing this. What would that have looked like if I had done that instead? And then it's just good practice for when you're in a real draft and you're like, okay, I remember, when last time. When we had a run like that, Hunter and McMillan went in the 3rd round. Wide receivers were gone quickly. So maybe I take 2 wide receivers here and get whoever falls between Walker, Chase Brown, James Cook, Christian McCaffrey at the 5-6 turn, that type of thing. I think it's just a good thing to always keep in mind. And that's why I always recommend doing a lot of mock drafts. Not only are they a lot of fun, but you can kind of learn things about, learn from mistakes or learn from things that you thought worked really well so that you can apply them when they're in a real draft.
Absolutely. And ADP is changing all the time. So like, mock draft that you did 2 weeks ago isn't the same as the mock draft you're doing today. Startup that you did 3 weeks ago is not the same as the startup you're doing today, because a lot of news is changing. We got some guys that are coming up soon here in Quinshon Judkins and James Cook, who, we don't exactly know the future for them. And so their ADP kind of falls, another round up, another round lower. But let's go back to the 5th round. And I wanted to spotlight, I hate giving Dalton credit. Just kidding. Love you, Dalton. But Baker Mayfield at the 5.9, that was a great value there, Dalton. Like Baker Mayfield to me is late 4th, early 5th in a super flex startup. I think taking him there at the 5.9, you just locked up Patrick Mahomes and Baker Mayfield as your QB1, QB2. Nice job there. You got Jamar Chase, Garrett Wilson, and Rashee Rice as your 3 wide receivers. Dalton loves, and I think the process is very solid there. I think that's normally the process that if I'm kind of sitting where he is or towards the end of the draft, try to leave that draft with 3 of the first 4 rounds with 3 wide receivers, even when it's only start 2. It's a very safe process about things, considering it's a very safe position in wide receivers. Austin, what do you like here in the 5th round?
I like the Mayfield pick, but I think Chase Brown is an incredible value. I think that I talked about how I thought about taking him. I mean, I'd take him over Caleb Johnson, over Josh Jacobs, over Kenneth Walker, over Derrick Henry even. So a lot of guys that went before him. And so I think that's very good value. I'm sure you probably were thinking about him if he made it to that 5-6 turn. I like Chase Brown a lot. I think he's going to be a workhorse. We've seen a lot of production from him already, but then also we already have the Zach Moss dealing with more injury issues and then getting cut. I expect we're going to see a huge workload for him, and still very young, and in a very talented offense that's going to need to score a lot of points. So I like Chase Brown a lot. He's one of my favorite kind of guys to get as a running back one if you waited, or a really, really solid running back two. And getting Bucky and Chase Brown, I think you're going to be very, very set at running back. So I like that pick.
Absolutely. And for me, you're absolutely right. I got sniped by Jose there. If Chase Brown had fallen one more pick, I would have felt much more comfortable with Chase Brown as my RB2, and it's still probably taking Jameson Williams at 6-1 or so. So going through the 6th round, I started us off here at Zay Flowers. We start next with Trevor Lawrence at 6'2 to Jose, DK Metcalf at 6'3, Quinshon Judkins at 6'4, JJ McCarthy, James Cook, DJ Moore, RJ Harvey. Last 3 picks being Caleb Johnson. So that's 4 picks. Cam Ward, Michael Penix, and Chuba Hubbard finishing up there the 6th round with you, Austin. And then you made the turn with TJ Hawkinson.
Yeah. So to me, Chuba Hubbard was the last of a tier. I think he's kind of the last kind of young guy who has a lot of right now value. So you have Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, and James Conner, but obviously all very short term bets. And then you have a lot of young guys. You have your Zach Charbonnets and your even Brian Robinson or Cam Scadaboo, those type of guys where you're making bets based on hope, right? Like you're hoping that they become something. So to me, he was the last in that range of guys that was like, okay, this is a guy that I've seen produce. He's a guy that I want in redraft, right? But he's also young, and I also think that I can get multiple years out of him. So that's why I went with Hubbard. Very happy with him at RB2, and I think that panned out well. Even though I would have loved to have a guy like Kenneth Walker or somebody like that, I do think that having Smith and then waiting on running back and then getting one, I think it worked out the way I want to. And then I didn't want to wait too long on tight end again. Like I had my 2 quarterbacks, I had my 2 running backs, I had my 2 wide receivers. And so then we're just looking at flexes and tight ends after that. So I thought, let's go ahead and grab a tight end. I like Hawkinson a lot. I think people forget just how good he was 2 years ago for the injury. He dealt with a really bad injury. He dealt with a new quarterback, just a lot of different things that didn't go his way. Still was all right. But I definitely expect a big bounce back season from him. I think JJ McCarthy is a guy that we've seen is not really an air it out kind of guy necessarily. I think Hawkinson will be a great safety blanket for him. And I expect a lot of checkdowns and a lot of production from Hawkinson. So I love him in the 7th. And at that point, I'm feeling pretty good about how my team's shaping out.
Yeah. I think you've built definitely something that, when you're looking at your first roster spots, Bo Nix and Kyler Murray taking up the quarterback spots. Then you got Puka Nacua, Devonta Smith. And then we're going to talk about, your 8th round pick, but I think Cam Sutton, or Cortland Sutton, jeez. Cortland Sutton at that 8th round pick was a good one for you to fill out the wide receiver 3 in your flex. And then Jahmyr Gibbs and Chuba Hubbard and TJ Hawkinson. You're doing great here, Austin. I think you're handling that 112 2-1 turn really well. Going back into the 6th round, my favorite pick right here, and it has to be Dustin here at 6-11 with Michael Penix. I think Michael Penix falling to almost the 7th round is almost criminal, considering, actually really a lot of these quarterbacks, because of the wide receivers pushing those quarterbacks down the board, people were getting great value on quarterbacks late. And honestly, we don't plan for these things, right? Because when I look at this, I'm like, I could have waited for a quarterback. I could have gotten something like a Devon Achane, Marvin Harrison, somewhere in there, but like that still felt early. But yeah, these quarterbacks are getting pushed down. I think Dustin definitely got a good deal on Michael Penix. Same thing with Greinberg with Cam Ward. But what is your favorite pick right here in the sixth?
Well, it's funny you mentioned Penix, and I would say like I like Penix. I would have taken Dak Prescott before Penix, but didn't matter because he ended up getting Dak Prescott anyway. So
yes,
you got them both. So I like that combo. I mean, you have a guy Penix, young, unproven, but a lot of upside. Dak kind of boring. We know what he is, but just very solid and consistent. So pairing those two guys together, I think is a good combination. I think it'll work out really well for him.
Dustin is having a really good draft for himself, especially considering he locked up 2 top 10 tight ends in a tight end premium format.
Mm-hmm. I also really like the Cook pick as well. I think he's very much, people are underrating him because of the concerns about him holding out or whatever. But I will say, like, it's his 4th running back. I'm sure he probably wasn't planning on that, but the value was just too good to pass up there. So I think that's I like James Cook there.
Yeah, definitely. So starting out the 7th round, you started it up with TJ Hawkinson. Deku ended up picking Dak Prescott at the 7-2. We talked about how great of value that is. Greinberg got Justin Fields at 7-3. Good value on a quarterback with good rushing upside. Colston Loveland going at the 7-4, Jared Goff at 7-5, Jordan Addison at 7-6, Joe Mixon 7-7, Alvin Kamara 7-8, Chris Olave 7-9, George Pickens at the 7-10, Mike Evans, and then I followed it up with David Montgomery and Tucker Kraft. And so you were right? Like we talked about how later in the draft I was able to lock down a pretty solid running back 2. And, to me, David Montgomery is as safe as they come when it comes to being on an offense that not only feeds the RB1, but also feeds the RB2 up to if Gibbs is out RB1 numbers. And so I wanted something, a safety blanket there for my team with David Montgomery. And then I ended up taking, my next, to me, kind of the end of that tier of tight ends. In a tight end premium and Tucker Kraft. I think that he's got the age on his side. He's proven that Love is, he has a great weapon in Tucker Kraft. And I expect a good 2025 season for him, as well as a good future with Tucker Kraft. I think the offense, to me, runs through Josh Jacobs and Tucker Kraft in Green Bay.
I like it. Yeah.
So what are our favorite picks from round 7 here?
I think, Mike Evans is a guy that
for sure.
Yeah, the Dak pick for sure. Mike Evans is a guy that, he's just been rock solid and consistent. I think if you get him, he took a little bit of a riskier pick with Travis Hunter earlier. So kind of mitigating that a little bit with a high upside, veteran Mike Evans. I like that pick there. I like your pick of David Montgomery. I think he's a good value there. Montgomery has shown that he can be a consistent performer. And I really like that value there at the 7-8 turn.
I also want to point out Logan's pick of George Pickens at 7-10. I think, we were talking about that tier of wide receivers, and you're taking on a little bit of risk with George Pickens because we know his past. I think you have to kind of give him a clean slate now that he's in Dallas. But Logan was able to get him basically a round and a half later than Jameson Williams, another round and a half later than Zay Flowers, basically, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, all of those wide receivers that he goes in that same tier. And he was able to get him at the end of the 7th, almost into the 8th round. So I think that was a good value there for Logan. He's definitely has an interesting build so far. I like it with Lamar Jackson, building it with Trey McBride, kind of as that hammer tight end in the last of that tier. And then we start to get into Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey. He's got a little bit of young upside with Tet McMillan, but he's building an interesting build. I don't mind it at all. I'll kind of turn it back to you, Austin, and kind of go through the rest of your draft there.
Yeah. So basically, for the rest of the way, I grabbed Cortland Sutton. I like him. I think he's a great value as a wide receiver 3 there. And then, Pearsall's a guy that's been very exciting lately, and I've started to rise higher and higher on him. So Calvin Ridley from there, and Calvin Ridley's another guy. That's going to be something that's super exciting to watch. Jacoby Myers I grabbed. So I just got a bunch of wide receivers. I kind of just added a bunch of them. I think between Sutton, Pearsall, Ridley, and Myers, I should be able to get a couple of them that produce and can fill in those flex spots. And then I went ahead and just kind of added in some running backs to help out my Gibbs and my other guys that I had in there. So I just said Spears and Sampson, and then so just kind of complemented that in there to help out with Gibbs and Hubbard, and just kind of fill out a team that I liked a bit better. And then here, can you scroll down for a second? Let's see. So it was Aaron Rodgers and Tyler Shuck. So just a couple different tight ends just to kind of fill out the roster, have 2 guys that look like they're both going to probably be starting quarterbacks that can kind of help out, my team and help out the 2 that I have as complementary pieces and guys that I can fill in if I need to as a, bye week fill in.
Absolutely. And so going to my team, I ended up following my pick of Tucker Kraft and went Green Bay again in a guy I think is very underrated in regards to the talent that he puts on the field. And I think is just kind of at this point misused by the Packers. But Jaden Reed, I think he provides a lot of high upside, especially as my wide receiver 4 on the team. Ended up taking Sam Darnold at the 10-1 to provide myself some QB flex there, just in case of injuries or bye weeks. And then following it up with Jalen McMillan, and I think a lot of people leave out Jalen McMillan for dead because of Agbuka coming up. I do believe that with the Godwin injury, I think there's a chance for McMillan to continue to showcase kind of what wide receiver he is for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Followed it up with Jaden Blue, so kind of an unknown at running back, but high upside and the potential that he is their RB1. And then kind of went with a flanker in Rashad Bateman that offers, again, some touchdown upside. Ray Davis at the 14th round, and then Harold Fannin Jr. in the 15th. So that kind of finishes out like your side and my side of the drafts. Overall, how did you feel about your draft, Austin?
I really liked it. I thought it was pretty well balanced. I started off, I have Gibbs and Hubbard as, anchor running backs. I do think maybe a little bit further down, the depth of the running back is not quite as good. But, I'm putting a lot of, I'm putting a lot of confidence in Gibbs to be my lead guy. And so getting a guy like Spears and Sampson to kind of help out with Hubbard, I think it'll be fine. Love the wide receivers. I think top to bottom, it's a very good group. Obviously, Puka is going to be my lead number 1 guy. And then just kind of a combination of older and younger guys at running back. And then Nix and Murray being very solid quarterbacks that I love. And then just a couple older guys that could kind of help out in bye weeks. And, I think it'll work out real well. I like the whole team, and I think that it's pretty well balanced. And I think all in all, I think it went exactly how I was hoping it would go. So I was happy with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to point out, I think you did a great job of, with picking Devonta Smith at 5'1" as your wide receiver 2, you ended up following it up really well by taking some proven vets in Cortland Sutton, Calvin Ridley. I mean, we see the upside with Ricky Pearsall, and we know what Jacoby Myers is. So I think that was about as well as you could basically draft your wide receiver position with where you drafted everything else. As far as my draft went, I definitely feel very, very strong in the QB position. And I think that's where my team is holding that value. As far as, we talked about some of the decision making when it comes to that third, fourth round and potential guys that you're taking the stabs on. To me, I do have Breece kind of in that spot above Jonathan Taylor. So, for me, it was kind of between, do I double tap wide receiver here? I wanted to get, a pretty solid running back. I think, you could definitely wait on a running back until later in the draft if you want to take an older vet and take the shot on that. But I think Breece at least is going to kind of anchor down that running back position for me for at least the next couple of years. Followed it up with Ron Odunze, Jameson Williams, and Zay Flowers. And so, these guys, they're definitely not proven in the sense that, other guys that went ahead of them or other guys that potentially went around them. But I think Rome Odunze offers a lot of upside in the same way that Jameson Williams does. And then Zay Flowers, to me, offers kind of a wide receiver 2 floor. I think he's going to be a consistent wide receiver 2. I don't know that he provides a higher ceiling than that, but ended up filling out the rest of my roster with David Montgomery as my running back 2. Tucker Kraft, I feel pretty confident as my tight end, especially getting him in the 8th round. Jaden Reed, Sam Darnold in the 10th round, especially as my QB3. I feel pretty comfortable about that, considering what Seattle is putting into him. And then finishing out the draft with Jalen McMillan, Jaden Blue, Rashad Bateman, Ray Davis, and Harold Fanning Jr. When I get to those later rounds, you definitely want to shore up some things, but I also want to take some high upside picks. And I think, definitely filling out the running back room with having Jaden Blue and Ray Davis as my RB3 and RB4. Those guys are young. They're going to get their shot on their respective teams. And, I think there could have been definitely some different process picks. Looking back at it, we always want to reflect on our mocks. It's not always going to work out for you. Things change when you're in the draft. You have to be able to look what's ahead of you, look what is behind you, and be able to plan like where your tiers at, right? Because you mentioned it earlier. You have to be able to plan those tiers out in a way that when you're getting towards the end, you need to smash that guy. Otherwise, you can maybe wait for another round and be able to take another guy that you want that's later on in the same tier, just like we talked about with George Pickens.
Yeah. It's always just that, figuring out what everybody else is doing, who's left, putting yourself in a position where you can wait for the position that you need, be patient, get your guys, really build the roster that, is exactly what you're looking for. And I think both what we did from the early pick and the later pick worked out both ways. And I think I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I think this was a good exercise.
Yeah. I mean, and to be fair, all of the guys that we're drafting with are great drafters. We know these gentlemen, they weren't going to let anything go. So when you have that, it makes it a challenge because there are other times when you have some weaker league mates that, you're like, oh, holy crap. Brock Bowers is falling to me at the 2-5. It's stuff like that you look at and you're like, you have the process and the plan. And then when it falls in your lap, you don't look twice. Now, Austin, as far as some of the teams that you might look at for this draft and really like some of the other league mates, we're going to finish up this episode just by talking about some of the other possible teams that really smashed this draft.
Yeah. Well, I really liked Dalton's draft. I mean, I think that he got really good value in the second and third round with Mahomes and Wilson. I do think the running backs are a little bit suspect. I mean, I think if you look at Judkins and Pacheco, there's some questions. But, that running back combination of Mahomes and Mayfield is great. Rashee Rice and Garrett Wilson as as going with Jamar Chase. I love that combination. Evan Ingram was really good value in the 11th round. So I like that draft overall.
Yeah.
I really like the draft that I had. I don't want to flex too much, but I really am happy with how it turned out. Really liked getting Kyler Murray in the 4th round. Really, I liked. There wasn't any drafts where I was like, man, this guy doesn't know what they're doing. I mean, obviously, this is a bunch of good guys drafting, and we really appreciate them being involved. And so, I think everybody had a good strategy and made it really interesting and kept it, really well balanced and made it quite interesting. It was a good exercise.
Definitely, and I agree. I think everybody drafted really well. I want to spotlight Dustin here, because I do like the beginning there with Bijan Robinson. Mm-hmm. He then followed it up with 2 great wide receivers in the 2nd and 3rd round with Amon-Ra, Marv Harrison. And then he ended up being able to take Warren and Kittle in the 4th and 5th. And I think Kittle is a great pick there in the 5th when you consider how much upside he provides, not only for right now, but he signed a contract with San Francisco for 4 years. So he is the guy in San Francisco right now. And I think Dustin definitely made some good smash picks there at the beginning. And then he had some gold fall to him in the 6th and 7th when he had Penix and Prescott to him there. So, I think where he kind of lost it a little bit was definitely the running backs, but you also we've talked about this before. You could trade for running backs in season, right? That's not if you don't like the build of your team, you act as if these choices and these assets are liquid, right? And so if I wanted to build a stronger wide receiver room, so forth, you could make that happen. And I think definitely these guys in this draft know that, and they're pretty strong with that. So we want to thank everybody that participated in this exercise. It's a good one to go through and just show the process behind why we're making the picks we're making, what we're doing. And we're definitely planning on doing more of these, especially as we talked about ADP changes and things change, especially as the year goes on, whether it's beginning of the season, off season, things like that. But Austin, any shout outs that you want to give?
Yeah, shout out to everybody who got involved. I mean, we really enjoyed, Lintis and Elren and Dalton and Buck Wild and Foot 22, all these guys that got involved for us and helped us do this. It's amazing to see everybody wanting to be a part of it and making it super easy for us to, be able to make this episode and kind of talk about strategies of how this would work. And thanks to everyone who helped us be part of this. It was a good time.
Absolutely. And I also want to extend the same sentiment to you guys and all of our listeners for being able to follow us and kind of help us really bring out the product that we're bringing to you guys. We've got some fun things planned, right now over the next month as we kind of lead into the NFL season. I'm very excited, and we've been talking about it a lot more with Dustin and Chris about getting them on for our kind of big crossover episode of the Devi Gambit. And then as we look into the NFL season, we're bringing you guys more and more stuff as we go along. So whether that's more roster reviews, more trade shows, things like that, and we're here for you guys. We're here to bring you guys good content. We want to thank the FSAN network and being able to allow us to provide the platform that we do. The FSAN Grindhouse is killing it right now between us, Devi Dojo, Craziest Corner, and any of the other shows that are putting out on that platform. We want to shout out you guys as well, because we're here, we're building as a team, and we're here for a good time.
Absolutely. Great. I agree totally. It's been great. Excited for FSAN, and they wanted us to kind of do a mock draft, and we planned it out, and we got a lot of people to be part of it, and I think it really was interesting. I think it was we got to see kind of some different directions you can go. We looked at the picking at the beginning and picking at the end, and the different turns and how that would look, and I think that it was a fun exercise, and it worked out really well. So we appreciate you guys watching it. We hope you enjoy it, and we'll have some more stuff coming up soon.
Awesome. Well, Austin, definitely we'll catch you on the next one, and for any of our listeners, definitely we'll be coming out with more content as we go along. Have a good night, guys.
Yeah, have a good night.